Welcome to On Rails, the podcast where we dig into the technical decisions behind building and maintaining production Ruby on Rails apps. And I'm your host, Robby Russell, and I run Planet Argon, and for over 21 years, we've helped teams maintain and evolve their long-lived Rails apps. So I tend to approach these conversations through that lens. In this episode, I'm joined by Joanna Wang, Senior Software Engineer at Sixfold AI. Sixfold helps insurance teams analyze complex cases using a mix of document processing, automated workflows, and AI-powered tools. Joanna has worked across Java, Go, Python, Node, and Ruby throughout her career, which gives her a unique perspective on what Rails does well and where teams can run into challenges as their applications grow. We'll talk about what Rails has enabled for her team, the realities of managing increasingly complex workflows, and whether agentic coding tools are changing how developers think about Rails' famous magic. Joanna joins us from New York City. All right, check for your belongings. All aboard. Joanna Wang, welcome to On Rails.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad that we were able to finally make this happen. And we think we had a conversation maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and we're like, oh yeah, this would be a great conversation. So we're here. Let's do this. All right. So Joanna, let's start with this. What keeps you on Rails?
Well, Rails has just a very almost completed ecosystem. There are just a lot of maintainers, and it just has a really big community and dev base so that if you have any problem with it or anything, you're probably not the only one, or you're not the first one to encounter almost anything. So I think that's a really great thing.
Now, we'll talk about Sixfold in a moment, but if I recall, you didn't work with Rails prior to your current position. Is that correct?
Correct.
Just to set the scene a little bit, what technologies, programming languages, stacks were you kind of working with prior to Ruby on Rails?
I started with Java in college. I was a computer science major, and then I worked on Python for about a year or so, and then I was back on Ruby on Rails, which is actually basically just also a Java JVM language suite.
Did you ever, out of curiosity, work with JRuby at all?
No.
Okay. I don't. Do you know what that is? No. Okay.
Well,
it's actually a way. It's a way that you can run your Rails like app within the JVM. So it's like it's a Java-based Ruby interpreter. So it's
interesting.
It was a way that a lot of organizations back maybe like 15, 20 years ago were able to kind of like sneak Rails into their Java environment and deploy it. I don't fully understand how it all works, but it's still a thing. So for those listening out there, but all right, well, great. So you have set the scene. You did work with Java, some Python, and things like that. So for our listeners who might not be familiar with Sixfold, can you give us a sense of what the company does and the kinds of problems you're helping solve with as an organization?
Yeah, we are an AI underwriter. So basically, when insurance underwriters have to underwrite cases, they need to do a lot of, like basically data points gathering. They look at the documents that are sent to them by brokers. Then they make a decision of like what the risk of this insurance, this company or person is. We kind of replaced like a lot of the human process in there. We basically streamline it from, you have a case like with a name, with maybe some documents. It could be from like an email. You can forward us an email. Then we'll basically just take it all the way to the end where we give you, okay, this is how much risk we think there is for this company.
With that workflow, is like you're ingesting a lot of data. It sounds like kind of a lot of complex things to try to make sense of. And I would imagine with insurance, I'm still trying to wrap my head a little bit around the AI and how to describe this to like I'm air quoting, technical people in the sense of like non-deterministic output and like being able to like say, what's the risk level here? What sort of technology and tooling have you been able to use there to make that kind of happen there? And then maybe tell us about how Rails then kind of fits into that.
Yeah, so the main app right now is actually on Rails. We're in this transitional phase where we were using the state machine, which is actually a gem on Ruby. And then we like are moving to Hatchet for basically like workflow management. And then on the AI side, for every kind of like evaluation, we use different models. We do evaluation with ground truths to like make sure your questions are being answered properly. Like this model is actually good. We do tune our prompts with evaluation to like try to give the most accurate result as possible.
Can you tell us a little bit about what's Hatchet?
It's a workflow orchestration tool.
And so is that basically a way to move your state machine type logic into a different platform? Is that
Yeah.
now,
Yes.
is that like some sort of WYSIWYG pull, map it all out that way? Or is it a lot of like code orchestrate, you like write code to orchestrate that in their tool, but then you're kind of letting them manage that workflow?
Let me just give you some background on how we did it. We have our code that orchestrates all the workflows with the state machine, the Rails like callback hooks, like on create and stuff like that. Now we're moving to Hatchet where you just get to define, this DAG where step after step, and then like when does this trigger another workflow? When does this end? What's the condition of a certain next step runs? And then Hatchet itself will be the engine that actually orchestrates it.
I see. Out of curiosity, what does the engineering organization look like today? Like roughly how large is the team on the engineering side?
I think we have about 20 to 30 people on
Okay.
engineering right now.
I think you mentioned in our prior conversation that there's a lot of Python developers there, I believe, and
Yeah.
working on Python things. And there's some folks working on the, maintaining and working on the Rails app and stuff. So how much crossover has historically needed to kind of happen between the teams?
Quite a lot. We actually work very closely because like basically the Rails app is like the web application, the worker for like orchestrating the jobs, for like database access, where the Python code base is the microservice basically for any like AI interaction. So they're in charge of like making a request to OpenAI, to Anthropic. It will then report back to the Rails app.
What do you think Rails has enabled your team to do particularly well?
It's what's the opposite of verbose, I guess. Like, so it's really not verbose, and like you can write very little code, which is really nice. Like, it's a double-sided sword. It has its benefits, which is like, yes, we write a lot less of code, but then I think historically it had also created some problems, maybe.
When you started working with Ruby on Rails, how people throw this word around a little bit, maybe a little overused, but did it feel like there was a little too much magic at all? Or was that, how would you have described it at the time when you speak to the verboseness aspect of it or the lack of it?
It was a lot of magic. I mean, to me, it was a lot of magic because I came from Java, which is a very verbose language. So for a little while, it was, I wouldn't say difficult necessarily, but it was a lot of like, oh, what is happening? I have to like keep jumping from this line to that line, jump all the way to maybe the library code to see, oh, okay, so then there is a helper because, like you don't actually need to define it, but it's just like under the hood, it's already defined. And then you kind of see that, then you understand, where this like specific method call is coming from.
Yeah. What about for like your peers? What was that? Did many of them have a Ruby or Rails background prior to?
Some, I think they expect or they kind of know a lot of the under the hood stuff. But I also think, especially for the team that works mostly on Python, when they ever have to touch the Rails side of code, they like have a lot of troubles because like a lot of it, or at least before like agentic coding, like, like we can't avoid that now, but like prior to it, like they were definitely having a lot of trouble understanding what is going on because almost nothing is like explicitly defined.
What parts of Ruby on Rails do you feel like have been most beneficial, or where did you appreciate the most out of, like, relative to other platforms and things you'd worked with in the past?
I do like how dynamic it can be. As an example, like one thing is like with Ruby, you could literally dynamically construct a class and then make a class method call. That is really, really cool. And like a lot of things like that. And then like you can just be having like, dot compact an array, and then it does everything for you. The easiness of using it is really great. And then the easiness to make things dynamic is also really great. Like I think that again, like I feel like it has two sides to it. I think it benefited us a lot, but it also creates some like confusions and like frustration when people are not so familiar with the code base or with like Ruby on Rails.
So maybe for folks that are kind of just jumping in and out of it or not working on a regular, but like they don't Do you feel like it's one of those things where like, where's this defined in the code base and not being super obvious or something?
Yeah.
I can appreciate that. So what has Rails allowed your team to accomplish during this important phase of your company's growth over the last few years?
I think not having to write code, like as much code, was very important. Being able to make things more dynamic, that accelerates like an early just setup of an initial app where we can sell, where we can like actually enable our customers to do the AI underwriting. That was very important because we had very few people. It wasn't an agentic coding era of time. You actually had to handwrite code to not have to, like, for example, list out every line in your database, every column in your database. Don't have to list out every like response to the front end. That was actually really like acceleration.
Now, has Rails been used for like a lot of the customer facing views and things like that? Or is it kind of more of the behind the scenes tool?
Yeah, so we use it for the REST API as well. We don't use it necessarily for views. We do use React for front end, but the REST API responses, all of that is still handled by Rails.
What about from like a database perspective? What have you been running that in? And then is everything kind of running historically through Rails or does everything touch their own databases?
Yeah, the Rails app is also the entrance to the database, like the only entrance to the database. Other microservices do not actually touch the database.
Interesting. Can you give us a little bit of background more on the migration to using something like Hatchet? But like historically, you mentioned you're using like state machines. So if you weren't going to be migrating to like a new platform, could you tell us a little bit about like some of the pain points that you found by using what? And out of curiosity, which gem were you using? Was it just like access state machine type of thing, or
It was mostly just state machine. I mean, we were also using active jobs. We were using factory, which is like a basically sidekick, but can be used in like other languages. Because then we also started using factory in Python for like the job handling.
interesting? What were some of the limitations of like using the gem? Was it just that it was too consolidated within the Rails app, or did you want to like kind of leverage that elsewhere, or where you felt like maybe from an architecture perspective, were you relying on feeding too many jobs to the Rails app to then have it do something when maybe the microservices could be just dispatching their own jobs, so to speak?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is like on the factory side, I think under like severe load, we were having problem with scaling. It gets backed up, but like it's hard to see or to like quickly resolve it when it's backed up. So that's one problem that's more or less on factory. But then on the other hand, we built our in-home like orchestration with the state machine and the callbacks for like, after create, stuff like that. So that becomes very brittle as the workflow becomes more and more complicated. It's very, very scattered how we like manage states. It's very reliant on, your database transaction is actually, completed. All of that is working well to be able to like transition. Then that transition itself, then we have some other side effects that comes with the transition so that we can push for next workflow to start. But then that also makes it very brittle because like sometimes you create a lot of racing issues. And then to handle those, you add more logic than making the logic even more scattered.
Out of curiosity, off the top of your head, are you able to kind of like walk us through like an example of some of that at a high level of what the orchestration might look like for like an actual use case, just for our listeners?
Yeah, for example, we do like web ingestion for like a company, which means like we would go search for information about the company online, then we like scrape those websites, create those documents, and then process those like web content. But the problem came as we realized like sometimes when we're scraping the web, it's very hard to say like this is actually the correct website because there is sometimes different names for the same company or like same name company, but they're different, actually not really related. So we started doing this thing, which is like after we scrape the web, we ingest the documents, then we're going to check if like every one of them is relevant. That means there is a fan out, then there is a fan backing. while we could also have documents for this company, like user uploaded. So these are all running in parallel. So now by the time where you want to fan all of them back in to say, okay, now we're done with this like document ingestion or like web ingestion, we can like move on to the analysis. That step became very brittle. Like we see so much like racing with it because they're all spread out, they're fanning out. We are starting a job on the microservice that's doing, like the AI stuff to decide if it's relevant. Then it fans back in. It become a nightmare. Like it's just at every possible place there is a race condition. Yeah.
That sounds like a fun challenge. Like to reach out for like a platform to maybe assist with that was part of that. Do you feel like just like outside of like the capacity of what your team could try to solve and keep figuring out amongst yourself without needing to bring in some more external or additional help out for a while and that sort of thing? Because I know there's companies that are doing really complex things within their apps from time to time, but also it's an interesting thing to be like, maybe we should reach out for a platform that might be able to assist with that and like let them figure out some of that stuff. I would imagine it doesn't solve all of the problems, right? But it maybe addresses like enough of it that it becomes like, oh, let's experiment with that. Do you remember some of the conversations, or was there any like hesitation, like why would we pass this off to someone else? We can figure this out ourselves type of thing, or did your team have like a culture of like, no, we're gonna like use the best tool for the job and we'll move off and try something else if that's gonna solve the problem for us?
I think both are true for us. One being like, I think we do try to buy over build. If there is a better tool out there, we would try to use the better tool. On the other hand, we did have the whole conversation about maybe we just rewrite this whole thing because, to some extent, it was also because as we add more complexity, we maybe didn't think through the architecture that well. So there was also the side, maybe we don't have to do this. We just like rewrite. Like, to be fair, the rewrite of these workflows has been on the table for a while, even before we even knew, or like even before Hatchet became like available at all. But at the time, it was also like, okay, there is Hatchet. Let's like maybe just try. We did have some other internal tooling that started using Hatchet as like a pilot to see like how well they do with workflows. And then we started like moving smaller things onto Hatchet to like solve some of the problems. And then it's proven to be like possibly more efficient and easier to maintain because, they give you this whole dashboard where you can like cancel jobs, like look at jobs, and like, that decision was made on like both ends.
Nice. This episode of On Rails is brought to you by Application Controller, where all roads lead and no logic escapes. Do you need to share a method across all controllers? Add it here. Want to run a callback before every action? You know where to put it. Do you need a place for auth logic, flash helpers, and a little panic code? It's waiting for you. Application Controller is the one file that's holding your app together.
And also maybe holding it a little hostage.
Side effects may include confusion, long scroll sessions, and blaming something in here for half of your bugs.
Application Controller, because if you don't know where it goes, it probably goes here. When we were preparing for this conversation, you mentioned, I think it was JSON API resources. Could you tell us a little bit about that and like what type of problems has that been helping your team solve since it was introduced?
It's a gem that gives you JSON API spec response for your like REST endpoints. It hooks almost directly to your database, to your controller layer. It's all the way. So you don't need to write anything that's like a create endpoint. Our controllers are like almost 100% empty. The files are there. You still need to create those files.
Sounds like a bunch of magic.
Yes, it's a lot of magic. It's great. It's great in the sense that like whenever you have a new model, you have a new entity or data model, you barely need to write anything. And it already gives you back a very, like it's JSON API standard response.
Interesting.
You don't need to write serializer either. So
is it everything on the like within the active record and active model where your business logic can kind of live and kind of protect everything, or is there some interesting layers where you do have to, is there like a DSL that it has to say like only these things are exposed so you can't like update certain columns or attributes or something like that?
So we do use action controller. We do use Pundit for authentication and some of the authorization. We do define rows of like read write, and then we do check for if they have the read write access. And then with the JSON API resource, you also get to define if you want a create, you want a read, like index, list, anything like that.
Was that introduced prior to you joining the organization, or was that?
Yeah.
Did you run into any interesting challenges with that, or has that in general been done its job pretty well?
With the magic comes the rigidness of it. It's very rigid in like what you can do with it, like how the errors can be handled. For example, if you want specific errors when you're doing, for example, you do a create and then you do like model checks, right? So generally with JSON API resource, you don't need to do anything. Like you don't even write like a query. You don't write the OOM query either. You don't write none of that, but you can still define, like my error classes with active record, right? Like the validation errors. But then with JSON API resource, those errors are very hard to then surface in the way you want it because it has its own very defined list and way of how it populates errors.
I see.
So then, yeah, whenever you want customization to it, it's a little bit of a pain because you try to add to it. On the other hand, the other thing is this gem is now not maintained anymore. So issues that comes with it just isn't going to be solved. So like we kind of have our own forked version of it where we solve some issues.
What's your team's approach to picking and deciding when you'll bring in like an external dependency? Do you feel like your team's philosophy has changed much in the last 6 months or so now that presumably that LLM is maybe agentic development is a little bit more prevalent in teams now?
The introduction of Hatchet is actually kind of an example of how we deal with like vendors. Like I think we generally would like to find, especially if like, for example, Hatchet is like a bigger tool, right? Like you gotta pay. But if there is like open source gems that do things for us, we would definitely try to look for tools that are already out there. Like I guess the mentality is that our value is not in creating those like like smaller tools, but in creating this like overall system for insurance underwriting.
The reason I asked about that is I feel like I've talked to some people where they feel like their teams are trying to are revisiting that approach a little bit, especially when it comes to like bringing in let's say a Ruby gem or some open source library, like, and you use that example of like JSON API resources, maybe not as actively maintained. And I just looked at their GitHub. It was updated 3 months ago, but it was to fix a Ruby 2.6 logger compatibility thing. So for Rails 6.0. So yeah, it's a little behind. Anyhow, but I think but when it comes to like with security in particular has been a thing that I think where we're pulling in external dependencies in particular. There's a lot of other attack surface levels, things that everybody's being a little bit more mindful, like Ruby gems. Like they just announced a new version of Bundler and Ruby gems will have like a cooldown feature, and so that we're not automatically upgrading things too quickly and bringing in a potential security risk because maybe an LLM just like installed the gem or what have you. Hopefully people are more thoughtful and catch that stuff. But yeah, I was just curious if that has been at all a discussion there about how your team's thinking about that, even maybe beyond just your Rails app.
For sure. The security issue has been a problem. I mean, not on Ruby or Rails, but like, the NPM attacks that, because we also use like TypeScript for front end. So like the NPM attacks has definitely raised our like awareness on like security vulnerabilities. So we do have a lot of like automatic tools that are monitoring it, new security vulnerabilities. And we put on a lot of emphasis on like fixing them as soon as possible. And then with like larger updates, especially for example, Rails, or like any Rails related like active record got a major update or anything like that, we actually don't do the general dependabot like upgrade. We like make sure like we do a proper like upgrade or migration, like having someone to like, even like in the age of AI, like we're like having someone to like make sure that everything works.
Nice. Well, out of curiosity, what sort of testing tooling has your team historically been using from the Rails side?
We use RSpec and then factory bot for factory items. And then we also use Capybara for some end-to-end testing.
Are there any other interesting tooling? How are you, like APMs or observability tools that your team tends to rely on?
Yeah, we use Datadog for like basically all monitoring.
Has your team been able to like leverage some of like the LLM tools with Datadog at this point? And out of curiosity, are you using much LLM tooling day to day in your coding activities?
Yeah, so much. We have basically every MCP. We are migrating to like, well, at this point, I think the migration to full agentic coding is done. But at one point, we were like just like really being really aware of this like change and like really trying to bring everyone in the organization up to speed with agentic coding.
What were some of the challenges that you've found through that process, regardless of the Rails part of it? I'm just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, sometimes it doesn't do what you ask it to do, or rather, you have to ask it in a very specific way for it to do what you need it to do. And I do see it also sometimes being overly defensive when it's coding.
Tell me more. Like, what do you mean by that?
Sometimes there are things that it's like, oh, we need to prevent for like this string being not empty or like not having any weird characters. But we know if that string is fed from an upstream of code, it's never going to happen. But then Claude would be like sometimes over defensive and just try to be like, hey, writing like, just 20 extra lines just to be like, oh, let's just make sure that like we catch every possibility of like the format of this string.
I can appreciate that. And when you mentioned you're like fully agentic at this point, what does that mean for you right now at Sixfold?
We almost, well, not almost. We pretty much we don't write code anymore. We don't write code anymore, basically.
Like in the 80-90% plus perspective of most of the code, or even more so, is almost entirely written. Like, are you orchestrating a bunch of agents right now at this point in parallel, or is that all happening kind of in your local environment? I know by the time we record this might change by the time it gets published, but it's kind of getting a sense of where your folks are at the moment.
Yeah, we are fully agentic. Like we are basically not writing any code. I think we're at a point where some people are still reading the code, but some people like are fully on the point where like if it works, then it's good. I don't care like to read the code anymore. I guess like this is where the org is at, but like in general, like nobody's writing code anymore. We don't review other people's PRs mostly. We do have agents also review the PRs. So a lot of the work is actually putting in the harnesses for the agents instead of like just writing code.
Can you tell us a little bit about like what those harnesses look like?
Yeah. So one, we have CodeRabbit that like is reviewing every PR. We do tune CodeRabbit. We do give it guidelines of like, what you need to be aware of. And then we do like ask everyone to like basically have documentation, have like a agent.md file, which is for, these are the pitfalls I've had. This is how this is designed. This is the general architecture. This is the pattern. So that then when an agent is coming to like make more addition to a feature, it has all these guidelines that it needs to follow.
How has that been for you as a software developer? Are you embracing it? You're excited, optimistic about this, or has it been kind of
I think it's an exciting time. It's like to me it's like, oh wow, what a time to be alive, and what a time to be working in this industry actually, because I think it completely changed what it means to be a software developer. In the past, like writing code is like, some people might say it's like an elitist thing almost. But nowadays code is cheap. I don't think the value of a software developer is gone. I actually think it's more like, the value of you is not about writing code. It's about thinking through a solution to a problem. It's about how you architect something so that it is, like it is not brittle, that it is robust, and you are solving a problem. You know how to scale it. I think that's really where now the value of a software engineer is at. It's not so much so about code. Like I to be honest, I myself never thought it was about writing code, because like syntax is always online, documentation was always online. Code is like, like your library is always there. But I think now it's very explicit in that way, such that, like code is cheap. It's easy to write.
Do you think that AI assisted development changes how teams might be thinking about those Rails abstractions? Do you feel like you've noticed much with how it's the using AI to help maintain the Rails app in particular has been a positive thing you've seen, and like, oh, it seems to actually work really well with Rails? Or what's your experience like?
Yeah, I think it's especially useful for Rails because of the magic. In the past, you have to like go through the code. You have to go through like very deep in the line, because like, other verbose language, you see it, you do a global search, you see that method, you see the definition. But like with Rails, like a lot of times you don't see it. Sometimes it's maybe like constructed. Sometimes it may be just like a Rails, like helper method that is not obvious. But with Claude Code, that's not a problem anymore. Like it knows, like you ask it, it can actually trace for you.
That's interesting. You mentioned earlier that there's people that kind of jump in and out of Rails with other tool sets that you're working with there, that agentic development has been able to make that a little bit easier for them because they didn't understand the magic.
For sure. Like they can actually do the real stuff. Like in the past, it was more like, okay, we have like, we kind of have this ask of like how we want the Rails site to be. And then they kind of hand it off to like a Rails, like the engineers that are working on the Rails side. But now they can actually take it to done.
Out of curiosity, with the Rails app, has your team built any interesting tooling or to help historically with like onboarding or just developer experience? Like any interesting little tools that are very, very specific to like ramping up things so you can have like let's say, for example, like do you have a pretty healthy seed system, or how does your team debug production level type things in a local environment within the Rails application part of your platform? Or is that kind of a challenging thing for you?
I think we did have some tooling for just getting things up. Like we did have, clear instructions and like commands that you just run to start your dev environment. And then we also did do a lot of like CLI commands to be like, okay, it's production. Like there are some specific things you need to do. You can't just like run this. You don't need to necessarily go into the Rails console. And then we sometimes have like customer support requests where they need a specific type of export or something like that. So like we had a lot of like CLI commands that were built for this reason. Now we kind of like also have a set of like Claude skills to be like, especially for setting up dev. Like there is a whole Claude set of things that you can just run, and then it'll take care of like setting up dev environment for you.
Oh, nice. That's cool. Is your Rails code base have a bunch of like dead pieces of like rake tasks? Or you mentioned like you're doing customer support and needing to generate some weird reports. Like how does your team typically manage that type of work historically? And do you feel like that's a little bit different now in your code base?
So in the very beginning, we used Thor for writing CLI commands. So like most of the time we would like, if a customer request keeps coming, we then write a CLI command, you just type in what you need, then it, it does what you need to do for it. Then we actually started this internal tool completely for handling like the mass majority of like the customer requests, which is just completely like its own, it's like hosted, and it does a lot of like exports, like the playground for the customer support.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then is that just connecting back straight to the same database then, kind of bypassing Rails, or does it go through Rails at all?
It actually just goes through Rails.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I was talking to a couple of people recently, and they were talking about how they've even been building, I don't know if your organization done that, but they've been building tools for like Claude skills that allow their customer support people to actually run Claude skills against the Rails, like Rails console, and they have like a protected version of the Rails console other things like that, so they can kind of like let it be more natural language and stuff like that. It seems like there's a lot of teams trying to figure out how to like take advantage of some stuff. And I think Rails recently came out with was it Rails query or something? I forget the name of it, but it basically kind of a little bit of a wrapper for like the Rails runner things you can pass. It'll generate queries for you or something like that. I'm like, that's kind of neat and interesting right now. I'm curious when it comes to like AI and the state of things at Sixfold. When it comes to the Rails app, and you shared a little bit about the orchestration and the underwriting process. Out of curiosity, is there anything about the data that Sixfold manages is there any interesting challenges you've had to do with like segmenting data, or do you have to do like a multi-tenant type thing, or is the data that's being shared in the system very, very important that you need to compartmentalize it from different customers and different clients and things like that, beyond just being like, here's a row in a database with a column? Or tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we are multi-tenant because we deal with insurance. We have to be HIPAA compliant. We have to be SOC 2 compliant. Our clients sometimes, if they're in a specific region, they actually have compliance where like your data can only be retained in that specific region. So with all of that, it just made more sense. And also, we do have a pretty big load in terms of like data processing. So with all of that, I think like the multi-tenant just makes more sense.
Is it the infrastructure then distributed across several regions then at that point then?
Yeah.
To make that work? So that's interesting. Okay. Say, like, how does that then work with like something like Hatchet? Is that then also needing to be isolated in different regions as well?
Yeah, we have specific, like basically for every, like for example, EU, like for every region, like that where it needs to be, there is like one for every like one of those hosted things.
And is the app basically then deployed out to each of those regions in parallel? And is it the same deploy, or do you phase deployments out to different regions at different points, and it's kind of like a one by one, or you can be selective about that approach?
We could be selective, but like in general, we just like deploy all at once. Yeah.
Okay. Do you lean on a lot of like feature flags or anything?
Yeah, that's actually the other thing, is like a lot of like our different clients actually want to use different features. So that also plays into the multi-tenancy, is like, we get to turn only certain things on for a specific client.
And what sort of tooling do you use for that?
We started with post hoc. Yeah. But then we actually started doing our own internal. We're just like mvars, and then we have this internal tool for flipping them.
Have you found like a good pattern for how to do that? Is that across your different stacks as well? So it's not just like something in your Rails app, but if you're using environmental variables and flipping switches somewhere, like what's the architecture of that kind of look like a little bit, if you don't mind sharing?
Generally, most of the features are maintained on the Rails side. If it's a feature, that we want to turn on for some clients, but not the others. For example, maybe like a prompt or like some specific things are on the AI side, then it would be an mvar on that microservice. We do have an internal platform that handles it. Maybe a set of customers have a specific feature, so we also have that to be able to apply to just a set.
Do you use any of that tooling to like roll out new feature ideas to a subset of clients before you roll them out to everybody, or to test things out before you fully roll it out to everybody?
Yeah, we don't do the, like 50% of customers on a place. We don't really do that. We generally roll it out 100% to a group of like maybe alpha or beta customers, or we roll it out into like the UAT and sandbox environments first, and then we would roll out to like the actual production.
You mentioned like things like Capybara, but does your team have like a QA type team there that is always like some humans doing that, or is that somewhat automated at this point?
It's somewhat automated. We do have front end testing as well, but then the full really like QA testing used to be completely human. We went through a couple iterations, I guess. We had like a dedicated QA person. We're now using QA Wolf to do the QA for us.
Nice. So Joanna, I want to ask you something. So let's pretend, we're going to do a little exercise here. Let's pretend it's your last day at Sixfold, and someone else is going to come joined the organization and you had 5 minutes with them and you needed to quickly say, hey, this is a typical Rails app. Well, you touched on the JSON API resources. You don't need to go too deep into that. But let's say, here's 2 or 3 things you should probably know about this Ruby on Rails application that might be a little atypical from other Rails apps. What would you tell them as you walk out the door? And say, good luck.
We have a lot of race conditions in the current state of workflows. Things are moving to a better state is our goal. Be on the watch out. And then most things are documented somewhere in Notion. If you have your Claude, just like try to read them all. Would be good. I think that's it.
Okay. All right. Well, that's fair. All right, Joanna, is there a technical programming-esque type book that you've historically found yourself recommending to your colleagues?
Yeah, historically I would usually recommend Clean Code and Clean Architecture by Uncle Bob.
Okay.
But I don't know if it's still relevant as of today with the agentic coding. Like maybe messy code is okay as long as it works.
Do you think there's still some value in trying to corral the agents into? It's interesting because it is so much about, I think it's an interesting thing about like, when are we opening up and having to look under the hood and do these things ourselves versus relying on the agents to sort these things out, but also needing to know how to corral them in a cohesive way so that we can keep things maintainable, right? So otherwise we'll be potentially burning a lot more tokens in the future to do things in the same way we burn human hours on being like, this is a mess, this is taking too long to do this, and we're still paying for this stuff. Supposedly, we're also living in this slightly subsidized token era of development. So see what that looks like. All right. But great recommendations. I'll include links to both of those in the show notes, Joanna. And with that, I want to thank you so much for just stopping by to talk shop with us on Rails.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been a delight talking with you as well. Thanks so much. That's it for this episode of On Rails. This podcast is produced by the Rails Foundation with support from its core and contributing members. If you enjoyed the ride, leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. It helps more folks find the show. Again, I'm Robby Russell. Thanks for riding along. See you next time.